Hello everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
He married me for money? Have you ever looked at the person sleeping beside you and quietly wondered if everyone else was right? What if the man you trusted with your heart had never really fallen in love with you? What if every smile, every promise, every gentle word was only part of a much bigger plan? I never imagined I would ask myself those questions. Yet one ordinary evening in our comfortable American home, while the dishwasher hummed softly and my children laughed upstairs, a single sentence shattered the peaceful life I believed I had built. He only married you for your money. I wish I could tell you I laughed. I wish I could say I ignored it, but I didn't. That sentence followed me into every room of my house, every conversation with my husband, and every silent moment before I fell asleep. My name is Emily, and this is not just another love story. This is the true story of how I almost destroyed my own marriage because I believed strangers instead of the man who loved me. If you have ever doubted someone you love, or if you have ever wondered whether money can quietly poison even the happiest relationship, stay with me until the end. The truth surprised me more than anyone else. Before we continue, take a slow breath with me because this story is also designed to help you practice English naturally. Listen slowly. Read slowly. Speak slowly. There is no rush. Every sentence is simple because real life does not need difficult words to touch the heart. My husband and I had what many people would call a good life in the United States. We both worked hard. We paid our bills. We cooked dinner together more often than we ordered takeout. On weekends, we visited local farmers markets, watched our children play soccer, and argued over which movie to watch on Friday night. It wasn't perfect, but it felt real. At least that was what I believed. Then something changed. It did not happen because of a dramatic fight. It did not happen because I found another woman's message on his phone. It began with a whisper. Funny, isn't it? Most marriages don't fall apart because of one huge explosion. Sometimes they begin to crack because of one tiny voice planted inside your mind. At first, I ignored the comments. Friends joked that I earn more money than my husband. A neighbor casually asked if he had signed a prenuptial agreement. Someone even laughed and said, "You're lucky. He found a successful woman." They smiled as if it were harmless. I smiled too. But deep inside, my brain quietly started collecting every little detail that seemed to support their story. Psychology calls this confirmation bias. Once people believe something, they naturally notice information that supports that belief, while ignoring everything else. I didn't know the scientific name at the time. I only knew my heart suddenly felt heavier every day. When my husband offered to let me manage our finances, I wondered why. When he thanked me after I paid for a family vacation, I questioned whether his gratitude was genuine. Even when he hugged me after a difficult day, a tiny voice whispered, "Would he still do this if you had nothing?" That question became louder than his actions. Looking back now, I realize how dangerous unchecked assumptions can become. In America, conversations about money are common. Couples discuss mortgages, retirement savings, children's college funds, insurance, investments, and monthly budgets almost every week. Money itself is not the enemy. The real danger appears when silence replaces honest conversation. I made that mistake. Instead of asking my husband how he truly felt, I began writing my own answers inside my head. And every answer was worse than the last. The strange part is that nothing on the outside changed. We still shared breakfast every morning. We still laughed with our children. We still kissed goodbye before work. Yet inside my heart, a quiet storm had already begun. I didn't know it then, but the next few weeks would reveal a truth that completely overturned everything I thought I understood about love, marriage, trust, and the rumors people create when they only see a tiny piece of someone else's life. The question that haunted me every night remained painfully simple. Did he really marry me for money? Or was I about to lose the greatest love of my life because I believed a lie? A perfect life. Or so I thought. If someone had visited our house that week, they would have believed we were one of those happy couples people secretly envy. Every morning began almost the same way. My husband woke up before I did, made coffee, and left a warm cup waiting on the kitchen counter exactly the way I liked it. Our children rushed through breakfast while arguing about whose turn it was to feed the dog. The television quietly played the local morning news. Outside, the neighborhood looked peaceful, with joggers passing by, school buses arriving on time, and neighbors waving as if life could never surprise them. From the outside, our marriage looked almost perfect. But I was beginning to discover something that many people never talk about. Sometimes a marriage does not change overnight. Sometimes the only thing that changes is the story inside your own head. After hearing those painful words, "He married you for your money," I noticed something frightening. My husband had not changed at all. I had. Every ordinary moment suddenly looked suspicious. When he smiled at me across the dinner table, I wondered if it was real. When he asked about my work, I quietly asked myself whether he was actually interested in me or simply interested in my income. Even the smallest acts of kindness became questions instead of comfort. Looking back now, I realize how dangerous imagination can become when fear is feeding it. There is a simple psychological truth that experts often discuss. Once doubt enters a relationship, the human brain begins searching for evidence to support it. Instead of asking, "Is this true?" we begin asking, "Where is the proof?" The problem is that our brains become very good detectives, but very poor judges. That was exactly what happened to me. One Friday evening, my husband suggested we stay home instead of going to an expensive restaurant. Before, I would have called him practical. Now, I secretly wondered if he wanted to save my money. The following weekend, he repaired our old dining table instead of buying a new one. Once again, my thoughts whispered the same ugly question. Was he trying to protect our finances because they benefited him? The strange part was that he had always been this way. He had always preferred fixing things instead of replacing them. He had always believed experiences mattered more than expensive purchases. Nothing about him had changed. Only my interpretation had. In the United States, conversations about money happen more openly than many people expect. Couples discuss mortgages, retirement accounts, health insurance, children's education funds, taxes, and monthly budgets as part of everyday life. Financial planning is considered responsible, not romantic. But there is another side that few people mention. Because money is discussed so often, people also make assumptions very quickly. They see one spouse earning more than the other, and suddenly they believe they understand the entire marriage. They don't. No outsider truly knows what happens after the front door closes. I wish I had remembered that sooner. Instead, I started noticing little details that had never bothered me before. One afternoon, I found my husband quietly reviewing our household budget on his laptop. He quickly smiled and closed it when I walked into the room. My heart immediately raced. Why did he close it? Was he hiding something? Was he calculating something? I didn't ask him. Instead, I smiled back as though nothing had happened while my imagination built an entire story without a single fact. That night, I barely slept. Every time I looked at him beside me, another question appeared. If money disappeared tomorrow, would he still choose me? The silence between us became heavier, even though neither of us had said anything wrong. The most painful part was that he still treated me exactly the same. He kissed my forehead before leaving for work. He texted me during lunch just to ask if I was having a good day. He called to see if I needed anything from the grocery store. Anyone watching us would have called us a happy family. Only I knew that inside my mind, our marriage had quietly entered a courtroom where my husband was being judged without ever knowing there was a trial. Then something happened that I never expected. 3 days later, I accidentally overheard a conversation that completely changed the direction of this story. At first, I thought it would finally prove everyone was right. Instead, it uncovered a secret that I wasn't prepared to hear, and from that moment on, nothing about my marriage would ever look the same again. The conversation I was never supposed to hear. 3 days later, I heard something I was never supposed to hear, and for a few terrifying seconds, I honestly believed my marriage was over. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had finished grocery shopping and returned home earlier than usual because one of my meetings had been canceled. The house was unusually quiet. I placed the bags on the kitchen counter and noticed that my husband's office door was almost closed. He worked from home several days each week, so that was nothing unusual. As I walked past the hallway, I heard his voice.
Calm.
Serious. Lower than normal. Instinctively, I slowed my steps. Then I heard one sentence that made my entire body freeze. She doesn't know how much money there really is. I stopped breathing. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid he would hear it through the wall. Was this it? Was everyone right all along? Every warning, every joke, every uncomfortable comment suddenly rushed back into my mind at once. I stood there completely still, unable to move, while my imagination finished the conversation before I had even heard the rest of it. That is exactly what fear does. It fills in missing information with the worst possible ending. I leaned slightly closer without making a sound. I wasn't proud of what I was doing, but at that moment I believed I deserved the truth.
His voice continued. No.
She still believes everything is under control. My stomach tightened. Under control? What wasn't under control? Was there hidden debt? Another bank account? A secret investment? Or something even worse? Then he became quiet, listening to the other person on the phone. I could only hear his side of the conversation. Every pause became another opportunity for my mind to invent a darker explanation. Modern psychology explains this perfectly. When people lack complete information, the brain automatically creates a story to remove uncertainty. The strange part is that the story is rarely positive. Our minds are naturally wired to prepare for danger, not comfort. In other words, my brain was trying to protect me by assuming the worst. Unfortunately, it was also destroying my peace. A few moments later, I heard him say another sentence that shook me even more. I don't want her worrying about it until everything is ready. My hands began shaking. Ready for what? Was he planning to leave? Was he preparing legal documents? Had he been pretending this entire time? I quietly stepped away before he opened the office door. My breathing was uneven as I walked back into the kitchen and forced myself to unpack groceries as if nothing had happened. Every sound in the house suddenly felt louder. The refrigerator door closing. Water running from the sink. Even the ticking clock seemed to accuse me of being blind all these years. When my husband finally walked into the kitchen, he smiled exactly the same warm smile I had seen every day for years. "You're home early," he said. Then he kissed my forehead like he always did. I smiled back, but it felt unnatural. For the first time in our marriage, I wondered if that kiss was real or simply another performance. During dinner, our children talked excitedly about school while I barely touched my food. My husband noticed immediately. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. Such a simple question. Such a simple opportunity to tell the truth. Instead, I lied. Just tired. He nodded with concern and reached for my hand across the table. I let him hold it, but inside my head, another battle had already begun. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately. Another part wanted proof before saying anything. What if I misunderstood everything? What if I embarrassed myself? Or worse, what if I discovered that every terrible suspicion was actually true? That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I quietly opened my laptop. I wasn't searching for evidence anymore. I was searching for reassurance. Instead, I found hundreds of stories online about couples who discovered financial secrets years after getting married. Hidden accounts, secret debts, double lives. Every article made my anxiety grow stronger. The internet has a dangerous habit of convincing us that the worst stories are the most common ones simply because they receive the most attention. I closed the computer just after midnight, but sleep never came. As I lay beside my husband, I stared into the darkness wondering if I truly knew the man sleeping next to me. Then something unexpected happened. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I felt him quietly get out of bed. He thought I was asleep. Without turning on any lights, he walked downstairs. A few seconds later, I heard the soft sound of a drawer opening in his office. Curiosity defeated fear. I slowly climbed out of bed and followed him, careful not to make a sound. What I saw through the small opening in the office door changed everything. But not in the way I expected. I followed him that night. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I stood barefoot in the dark hallway, barely breathing as I watched my husband through the small opening in his office door. And I truly believed I was about to discover the secret that would end our marriage forever. The room was lit only by the soft glow of his computer screen. He wasn't talking on the phone. He wasn't packing a suitcase. He wasn't writing messages to another woman. Instead, he unlocked a small metal box that I had never seen before. My heart began pounding so hard that I could hear it in my ears. He slowly removed a thick folder, placed it on the desk, and stared at it for several seconds without moving. Then he sighed. It wasn't the sigh of a man celebrating success. It sounded heavy, exhausted, almost painful. Still, fear refused to leave me. I quietly leaned a little closer, trying to understand what I was seeing without making a sound. He opened the folder carefully. I could not read every page from where I stood, but I immediately recognized numbers, legal documents, bank statements, and what looked like insurance paperwork. My stomach dropped. Money. Again. My mind instantly connected every rumor I had heard over the past few weeks. He married you for your money. He's protecting his future. One day you'll understand. Suddenly, every careless comment people had made felt like evidence. It is amazing how quickly the brain creates certainty from incomplete information. Researchers often explain that anxiety reduces our ability to think objectively. Once fear takes control, the emotional part of the brain speaks louder than logic. Looking back, I can honestly say that I wasn't seeing reality anymore. I was seeing my fears wearing the mask of reality. My husband rubbed his forehead and quietly whispered something I could barely hear. Just a little longer. I froze again. Just a little longer until what? Until he told me the truth? Until he left? Until he gained complete control of our finances? Every possibility sounded worse than the last. Then he reached into the folder and pulled out a photograph. It was an old family picture of the four of us taken years earlier during a summer picnic. He smiled at the picture, but instead of looking happy, he looked emotional. His eyes remained fixed on it for nearly a minute before he carefully placed it back inside the folder. I didn't understand. Nothing made sense anymore. If this was some kind of financial plan against me, why was our family photo hidden inside those documents? I wanted to walk into the room and demand answers. I wanted to shout, "What are you hiding?" But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the tiny part of my heart that still trusted him. So I quietly returned upstairs before he noticed me. That decision would become one of the most important moments of my life. The next morning, everything looked strangely normal again. He made coffee. He smiled. He asked whether I wanted eggs or toast for breakfast. Our children rushed through the kitchen laughing about something that happened at school the day before. Watching him joke with the kids made everything even more confusing. If he was pretending, he was the greatest actor I had ever met. Yet another voice inside me whispered something different. What if you are the one pretending? Pretending that suspicion is the same thing as truth. Pretending that assumptions are facts. The entire day became a silent battle between those two voices. At work, I found myself reading the same email 3 times without understanding a single sentence. Every few minutes, my thoughts drifted back to the metal box, the folder, and the words I had overheard. She doesn't know how much money there really is. I kept repeating that sentence over and over, searching for a meaning that would finally explain everything. By evening, I had convinced myself that there was only one way to learn the truth. I would open the box myself. I hated the idea. It felt dishonest. It violated every value I believed a marriage should have. But doubt is persuasive. It tells you that breaking trust is acceptable if you're searching for the truth. That night, my husband left the house for about an hour to help a neighbor whose car had broken down. The children were upstairs finishing homework. The office downstairs was empty. I stood outside the door for nearly 5 minutes, arguing with myself. Then I walked in. My hands trembled as I pulled open the desk drawer where I had seen him place the key. For a brief second, I almost stopped. One decision could either save my marriage or destroy it forever. I unlocked the metal box, lifted the lid, reached for the mysterious folder, and when I opened the very first page, I didn't find what I had expected. I found my own name written across the top beside words that instantly filled my eyes with tears. At that moment, I realized I had been asking the wrong question from the very beginning. The truth hidden behind my name. The first page of that folder did not contain divorce papers, secret investments, or evidence that my husband had married me for money. Instead, my own name appeared in large letters beside a title that made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped the documents. It read, Family Financial Protection Plan. I stared at the words for several long seconds, unable to understand what I was looking at. My heart, which had been racing with fear only moments before, suddenly slowed. Had I misunderstood everything?
No.
It couldn't be that simple. I turned the page. The next document listed life insurance beneficiaries. My name. Our children's names. Every policy was designed to protect us if something ever happened to him. Another page contained retirement accounts. Again, everything pointed toward our future together. There were no hidden accounts with another woman's name. No secret transfers.
No suspicious transactions.
The more pages I read, the more confused I became. Then I reached a handwritten note tucked between 2 folders. It wasn't addressed to a lawyer. It wasn't addressed to a financial advisor. It was addressed to me. If you ever read this before I'm ready, it means life surprised us again. My eyes stopped moving across the page. I could barely breathe. You always worry about everyone else before you worry about yourself. I promised the day we got married that I would make sure you and the kids would always be safe, even if I couldn't be here one day. Tears began forming before I even realized I was crying. I kept reading. I know you don't like talking about money. You say love is enough. I wish that were always true. But love also means preparing for difficult days before they arrive. Suddenly, every conversation I had misunderstood over the past few weeks replayed inside my head from a completely different perspective. She doesn't know how much money there really is. He hadn't been hiding money from me. He had been protecting a surprise financial plan that he wanted to finish before telling me. I don't want her worrying until everything is ready. Of course he didn't. He knew how easily I became anxious. He wanted to give me certainty instead of unfinished plans. I sat there in complete silence, feeling something much heavier than relief. It was guilt. Deep, painful guilt. Modern psychologists often describe something called the fundamental attribution error. We naturally explain other people's behavior by questioning their character while explaining our own mistakes by blaming circumstances. That was exactly what I had done. When my husband kept financial documents private, I assumed selfish motives. When I secretly searched through his office, I told myself I had no choice. I judged him harshly while excusing myself completely. That realization hurt more than anything I had imagined finding inside that box. I continued reading. Inside another envelope was a detailed plan for our children's college education. Every monthly contribution had been carefully recorded for years. Beside each child's name were handwritten notes about their dreams. Our daughter wanted to become a veterinarian. Our son had once said he wanted to design airplanes. My husband had written little reminders beside each goal, almost like private promises to himself. There was another page that stopped me completely. At the top, in his familiar handwriting, were the words, "Things I never want her to worry about." Underneath was a simple list: mortgage, emergency savings, college tuition, retirement, medical expenses, home repairs. It wasn't a list of things he wanted from me. It was a list of burdens he hoped I would never have to carry alone. Suddenly, I remembered dozens of small moments that I had ignored. Every time he fixed something instead of replacing it. Every time he compared prices before buying anything. Every weekend, he worked extra hours while telling me he simply enjoyed staying busy. I had mistaken responsibility for calculation. I had confused careful planning with hidden intentions. The most heartbreaking discovery came at the very bottom of the folder. It was another note, dated almost 2 years earlier. If she ever asks whether I marry her for money, I hope I laugh first, because she is the greatest investment my life ever gave me, and love is the only return I ever wanted. I cover my mouth to keep from crying out loud. In that single sentence, every rumor that had haunted me suddenly sounded ridiculous. I had allowed strangers, gossip, and fear to become louder than years of kindness, patience, and everyday love. I quietly closed the folder, returned every document exactly where I'd found it, locked the metal box, and placed the key back inside the drawer. Then I sat alone in the dark office, listening to the silence. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt ashamed, because I now understood something that no article, no rumor, and no social media advice had ever taught me. The greatest threat to my marriage had never been money. It had never been my husband. It had been the story I created inside my own mind. But I still hadn't told him what I had done. He still didn't know I had read every page. And as I heard his car pulling into the driveway a few minutes later, I realized the hardest part of this entire story was only beginning. How could I possibly look into his eyes and confess that I had doubted the one person who had been protecting me all along? The night I finally told him everything. The moment I heard the garage door open, my heart began beating faster than it ever had before. Because I knew the biggest secret in our marriage was no longer hidden inside a metal box. It was inside me. I had crossed a line I never imagined I would cross. I had searched through my husband's private documents. I had doubted his love. I had believed strangers more than the man who had stood beside me through every ordinary day of our life together. As his footsteps came closer, I quickly wiped my eyes, hoping he would not notice I had been crying. The front door opened. He walked inside carrying a small paper bag from the local bakery. "I brought your favorite cinnamon rolls," he said with the same warm smile that had greeted me thousands of times before. That simple sentence nearly broke me. Someone pretending for money does not usually remember your favorite dessert after a long day. Yet there he was, completely unaware of the storm that had been living inside my mind for weeks. During dinner, our children laughed about school projects while I barely spoke. Every few minutes, my husband looked at me with quiet concern. Finally, after the kids went upstairs, he gently asked, "Emily, what is going on?" His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was full of genuine worry. For a few seconds, I almost lied again. I almost said I was simply tired. But something inside me refused to let another dishonest moment pass between us. I took a deep breath and quietly said the words I had been afraid to admit. "I need to tell you something, and I'm not proud of it." He sat across from me without saying a word. I could see in his eyes that he already knew this conversation mattered. My hands trembled as I explained everything. I told him about the comments people had made. I admitted that I had started believing the rumors. I confessed that I had overheard part of his phone conversation. Then I looked down at the table and whispered the hardest sentence of all. "I opened your box. I read everything." Silence filled the room. It wasn't an angry silence. It was something much heavier. For several long seconds, neither of us moved. I couldn't even look at him because I was terrified of what I might see on his face. Disappointment, betrayal, maybe even the beginning of the end. Then I heard something completely unexpected. He quietly exhaled and asked, "Is that why you've looked so scared these past few weeks?" I slowly raised my eyes. There was sadness on his face, but not the kind I expected. He wasn't sad because I had read the documents. He was sad because I had carried so much fear alone. "Emily," he said softly, "why didn't you just ask me?" That question hit me harder than any accusation ever could. Why hadn't I asked him? The answer sounded embarrassing once I finally spoke it aloud. Because I was afraid the answer would hurt. He nodded slowly. "And instead, the silence hurt you even more." Those words stayed with me because they were absolutely true. Relationship experts often explain that the absence of communication creates a space where fear naturally grows. When couples stop asking honest questions, assumptions quickly become substitutes for truth. That was exactly what had happened to us. Not because we stopped loving each other, but because I stopped trusting enough to ask difficult questions. I apologized through tears. Not just for opening the box, but for quietly putting him on trial without giving him a chance to defend himself. I expected him to be angry. Instead, he reached across the table and held my hands exactly as he had done on our wedding day. "Do you remember what I promised you?" he asked. I nodded through tears. "You said we'd always face problems together." He smiled gently. "Exactly. Together. Never separately." Then he told me the truth behind everything I had misunderstood. The financial plan had started almost 3 years earlier after one of his closest friends unexpectedly passed away, leaving behind a wife who knew nothing about their finances. Watching that family struggle had frightened him. He promised himself that if anything ever happened to him, I would never face that kind of uncertainty. That was why he had spent months meeting with financial planners, updating insurance policies, organizing documents, and preparing everything carefully before surprising me on our upcoming wedding anniversary. He wanted to give me peace of mind, not another burden. Suddenly, every mysterious phone call, every late meeting, every quiet evening spent reviewing paperwork finally made sense. None of it had been about protecting money from me. It had all been about protecting me from future uncertainty. Tears rolled down my face again, but this time they came from relief instead of fear. I thought the hardest part of our conversation was over. I was wrong. My husband looked at me with incredible kindness and quietly asked one final question. Emily, do you still believe I married you for money? I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could speak, he reached into his pocket, placed a small velvet box on the table, and smiled in a way I had never seen before. Before you answer, he whispered, there's something I've been waiting months to show you. Inside that little box was something so unexpected that it completely changed the ending of our story. The secret inside the velvet box. The small velvet box sat quietly on our kitchen table, yet it felt heavier than every rumor, every sleepless night, and every fear I had carried inside my heart. My husband gently pushed it toward me, without saying another word. My hands were still shaking as I reached for it. For one impossible second, my mind invented another terrifying story. Was this a goodbye gift? Was he trying to soften the pain before telling me our marriage was over? Fear has a strange way of surviving even after the truth begins to appear. It always whispers, maybe there's still something worse coming. I slowly lifted the lid. Inside was not an expensive diamond necklace. It wasn't a luxury watch or anything that reflected wealth. Instead, I found a simple silver ring, carefully engraved with 4 tiny words on the inside. Always choose us first. I looked at him, completely confused. He smiled softly before speaking. That's the sentence I wanted us to live by for the rest of our lives. Tears immediately filled my eyes again. He continued, I wasn't planning to give this to you tonight. I was saving it for our anniversary next month. I wanted it to remind us that no matter how busy life becomes, no matter how much money we make or lose, we choose each other first. My throat tightened. For weeks I had been secretly questioning whether he had chosen my bank account. All along, he had been preparing a symbol that reminded us never to place anything above our relationship. The contrast was almost unbearable. I felt ashamed, but I also felt something far more powerful. I felt safe again. My husband reached across the table and gently held my hand. Emily, he said quietly, people only see a few minutes of someone else's marriage. They never see the thousands of ordinary moments that actually build it. That sentence stayed with me because it perfectly described the world we live in today. Social media, neighborhood gossip, quick opinions, and dramatic stories often convince us that we understand other people's lives. In reality, we usually see less than 1% of the truth. I nodded slowly, still staring at the ring. I believed them, I whispered. For a while. I believed you married me because of money. He smiled sadly, but there was no anger in his eyes. I know. I looked up in surprise. You knew? He nodded. Not because someone told me, because I could see it. I frowned, confused.
See what?
He leaned back in his chair before answering. You stopped looking at me the way you used to. Every question sounded careful. Every smile looked forced. Every hug ended just a little too quickly. His words hit me harder than I expected. I thought I had hidden my fears perfectly. I hadn't. Love notices small changes long before words are spoken. Researchers who study long-term relationships often explain that emotional distance rarely begins with arguments. It usually begins with tiny behavioral changes that partners unconsciously recognize. Less eye contact, shorter conversations, longer silence, more hesitation. We think we're protecting ourselves by hiding our fears. But the person who truly loves us often senses that something is wrong long before we admit it. Then why didn't you ask me? I finally said. He smiled gently. Because I thought you would tell me when you were ready. That answer completely changed the way I understood patience. He wasn't ignoring the problem. He was respecting my timing. Looking back, I realized how often we expect the people we love to read our minds while refusing to speak our hearts. We both laughed quietly through our tears when I admitted something almost embarrassing. Do you know what scared me the most? He shook his head. That phone call. When you said, "She doesn't know how much money there really is." He covered his face with one hand and actually laughed for the first time that evening. Emily, I wasn't talking about our bank account. I stared at him. You weren't? He smiled.
No.
I was talking to our financial planner about the education fund I started for the kids. We had finally reached a milestone I wanted to surprise you with. That's why I said you didn't know how much money there really was. I wanted it to stay a surprise until everything was finished. I couldn't believe it. One sentence. Just one incomplete sentence had nearly destroyed the trust we spent years building. That realization frightened me because it made me wonder how many other relationships fall apart over stories that were never actually true. We sat together for a long time that night, talking more honestly than we had in months. There were no raised voices.
No dramatic accusations.
Just two people choosing truth over assumptions. Before we finally went upstairs, my husband slipped the silver ring onto my finger. This isn't replacing your wedding ring, he whispered. It's reminding us what keeps it meaningful. I smiled through tears and finally answered the question he had asked earlier. No, I said softly. You didn't marry me for money. You married me because you believed we could build a life together. He kissed my forehead exactly the way he always had. But this time, I understood something I hadn't understood before. Real love isn't proven during perfect days. It's revealed after doubt has the opportunity to win, and doesn't. Still, one final surprise was waiting for me. And it would arrive only a few days later, when our children unknowingly revealed something that made me realize my husband had been quietly teaching our family a lesson about love for years without any of us noticing. What our children knew before I did. Only 4 days after that unforgettable conversation, our children accidentally revealed something that made me realize I had completely misunderstood my husband for years, and strangely enough, they had understood his heart better than I had. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning. The sunlight filled our kitchen, pancakes were cooking on the stove, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The fear that had haunted me every night was gone, but a different feeling had taken its place.
Curiosity.
I wanted to understand the man I had married, not just forgive myself for doubting him. While I was cleaning the breakfast dishes, our daughter walked into the room carrying a small notebook decorated with colorful stickers. Mom, she asked innocently, do you remember Dad's family rule? I smiled. Which one? Without thinking, she answered. The one he says every Sunday. Before I could ask another question, both children said the sentence together as if they had practiced it hundreds of times. People are always more important than money. I froze. My husband looked up from the coffee machine and smiled quietly, almost embarrassed that they remembered it so well. Our son laughed and added, Dad says money is a tool. Family is the reason. I felt a lump forming in my throat. How had I missed this? Every single week, while I was busy planning schedules, answering work emails, and thinking about everything that needed to be done, my husband had been quietly teaching our children values that couldn't be measured with a bank balance. Suddenly, memories came rushing back. Every Sunday evening, before the new week began, we always sat together for dinner. I had assumed those conversations were simply family traditions. Now I remembered the questions he often asked the kids. Who helped someone this week? Who said thank you today? What made you smile? He almost never asked who got the highest score or who earned the most. At the time, those questions felt ordinary. Looking back, they revealed exactly the kind of man he truly was. Child development experts often explain that children rarely remember expensive gifts years later. Instead, they remember repeated emotional experiences, family dinners, bedtime conversations, words spoken over and over until they quietly become beliefs. Sitting there in our kitchen, I realized our children had already learned the lesson that I had nearly forgotten. Character lasts longer than income. That afternoon, we decided to take a walk through our neighborhood park, something we had done countless times before. Families filled the playground. Some parents were coaching soccer. Others pushed strollers beneath tall trees while children laughed in every direction. My husband reached for my hand as naturally as he always had. This time I held it tightly without hesitation. We sat on a bench while the kids raced toward the swings. After a few quiet minutes, I asked him something I should have asked weeks earlier. "Can I ask you an honest question?" He smiled. "Always." I looked into his eyes and said, "If I had lost everything, every dollar, every investment, every piece of financial security, would you still have married me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward our children playing together before speaking. "Emily, when I asked you to marry me, do you remember where we were?" I smiled. "The old lakeside park." He nodded. "Do you remember how much money either of us had?" I laughed softly. "Not much." He smiled back.
Exactly.
"We didn't build this family because we had money. We built it because we believed we could face life together." His answer was so simple that I wondered why I had spent so many sleepless nights searching for a more complicated explanation. Sometimes the truth isn't hidden because it's difficult. As we continued walking, we passed an elderly couple sitting quietly on another bench. They weren't talking. They simply held hands while watching the children play. My husband nodded toward them and quietly said, "That's what I hope we look like one day." I smiled without saying anything because for the first time in weeks, I believed we actually would. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, I found the silver ring he had given me only days earlier. I turned it slowly until I read the engraving once more. "Always choose us first." Those 4 words suddenly felt much bigger than our marriage. They described every decision he had made without asking for recognition. Every financial plan. Every late night organizing documents. Every careful conversation with advisors. Every small sacrifice I had mistaken for secrecy. Then my phone buzzed with a message from a close friend who had unknowingly started many of the rumors weeks earlier. She wrote only one sentence. "I heard something interesting about your husband today." For the first time, I wasn't afraid to read it. But what she told me next would expose the real origin of the gossip that nearly destroyed my marriage, and it would force me to make one final decision that changed not only my family but also the way I would trust people for the rest of my life. The rumor that almost destroyed my marriage. I stared at the message on my phone for nearly a full minute before opening it, because only a few weeks earlier those same words would have sent me into another spiral of fear, but this time something inside me had changed. My friend had written, "I finally found out where the rumor about your husband started." I slowly unlocked my phone, expecting another painful surprise. Instead, I discovered something far more shocking than I had imagined. She explained that months earlier, someone at a neighborhood charity event had overheard part of a conversation between my husband and a financial advisor. They caught only a few sentences about insurance, investments, and protecting assets. They never heard the rest of the conversation. By the end of that week, the story had already changed. One person told another that my husband seemed unusually interested in finances. Someone else added that I earned more money than he did. Another person guessed he must have married into financial security. Before long, a completely invented story was traveling through our community as if it were an established fact. Nobody had lied intentionally at the beginning. They had simply filled empty spaces with assumptions. That frightened me more than if someone had deliberately tried to hurt us. It meant ordinary people, kind people, intelligent people could accidentally damage someone's life simply by repeating something they never verified. My husband quietly read the message after I handed him my phone. He smiled sadly instead of looking angry. "I wondered if it started that way," he said. I looked at him in disbelief. "You already suspected this?" He nodded. Rumors usually don't begin with evil. They begin with incomplete information. That sentence stayed with me because it explained not only what had happened to us, but also what happens every day in families, workplaces, friendships, and communities across America. A small misunderstanding becomes a confident opinion. That opinion becomes a repeated story. Eventually, the story feels more believable than reality itself. Communication experts often describe this phenomenon as the telephone effect. Every time information passes through another person, tiny details disappear while new assumptions quietly take their place. By the time the story reaches its final listener, it barely resembles the original truth. I realized I had become the final listener in my own marriage. Instead of trusting years of lived experience, I trusted fragments of conversations that were never meant to explain my husband's heart. A few days later, we attended another neighborhood gathering. I won't pretend I wasn't nervous. Part of me wondered whether people were still whispering when we walked into the room. Maybe some were. Maybe some weren't. But something unexpected happened. One neighbor approached my husband and apologized. He admitted that he had repeated something he never should have repeated. Another person quietly confessed that they had assumed our marriage was built around money simply because I happened to earn more during certain
years.
Listening to those conversations taught me an important lesson about life in America. Financial success often attracts opinions from people who know nothing about your private reality. Income differences inside a marriage may look unusual to outsiders, but healthy relationships are built on partnership, not scorekeeping. Every family has seasons. Sometimes one spouse earns more. Sometimes the other carries the financial responsibility. Sometimes both struggle together. None of those situations reveal how deeply two people love each other. That evening, as we drove home, I asked my husband whether he was upset with the people who had spread the rumors. He looked through the windshield for a moment before answering. "If I spend my life trying to correct every false story people tell, I'll never have enough time to enjoy the true story we're living." I smiled because that sounded exactly like him.
Calm.
Practical.
Kind.
He had every reason to be bitter, yet he chose peace instead. Research on long-term happiness consistently shows that forgiveness often reduces emotional stress more effectively than holding on to resentment. Sitting beside him in that quiet car, I finally understood why forgiveness is not about pretending something never happened. It is about refusing to let someone else's mistake continue controlling your future. When we arrived home, our children ran toward the front door, excited to show us drawings they had made. One picture showed our family holding hands beneath a bright blue sky. Above our heads, our daughter had written in colorful letters, "Home is where love stays." I felt tears filling my eyes again because children often express profound truths with remarkable simplicity. They had never cared who earned more money. They had never questioned why their father worked late organizing financial documents. All they remembered was that both parents showed up, listened, laughed, and loved them every day. Before going to bed that night, I stood quietly in front of the bathroom mirror and asked myself one final question. If I could go back to the moment when I first heard someone say, "He married you for money," what would I do differently? The answer came immediately. I would walk straight to my husband, sit beside him, and simply ask, One honest conversation could have prevented weeks of fear, sleepless nights, and unnecessary pain. But although our marriage had survived the rumor, one final lesson still remained. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about trust. It was about discovering why the happiest marriages are not built by perfect people, they are built by two imperfect people who choose each other again. And again, especially after life gives them every reason to walk away. He never married me for money. If you have stayed with me until this final chapter, then you deserve to know the complete answer to the question that almost changed my life forever. Did my husband marry me for money?
No.
Not even close. The real tragedy is that I spent weeks searching for proof that he loved my bank account while completely overlooking the thousands of quiet moments. Proving that he loved me. Looking back now, I realize something that still gives me chills. My marriage was never in danger because of money. It was in danger because I allowed fear to become louder than trust. One careless rumor entered my mind, and before I knew it, I had rewritten years of beautiful memories into a story that never actually existed. That experience changed me forever. Today, when I wake up in our home, I notice different things. I notice the cup of coffee waiting for me every morning. I notice the way my husband still checks that every door is locked before we go to bed, because he wants us to feel safe. I notice how he still laughs at my terrible jokes even when they're not funny. I notice how he listens when our children tell long stories that seem to have no ending. None of those moments make dramatic headlines. None of them become viral videos. Yet those ordinary moments are exactly where real love lives. We often believe love must be proven through grand romantic gestures, expensive gifts, or unforgettable surprises. But after everything we experienced, I learned that the strongest marriages are built through thousands of tiny choices repeated every single day. Choosing patience over pride. Choosing conversation over assumptions. Choosing forgiveness over resentment. Choosing each other before choosing comfort. That silver ring he gave me has never left my hand. Every morning I read the words engraved inside it. Always choose us first. Those 4 words have become the foundation of our family. Whenever life becomes stressful, whenever work becomes overwhelming, whenever unexpected challenges appear, as they always do, we remind each other of that promise. Not because our marriage is perfect, but because it is worth protecting. Living in the United States has also taught me another valuable lesson that I wish someone had shared with me years ago. People will always have opinions about your marriage, your finances, your parenting, your career, and your lifestyle. Some opinions will be kind. Others will be unfair. A few may even sound convincing. But none of those voices should ever become louder than honest conversations inside your own home. Every family has struggles that outsiders never see. Every couple faces seasons of uncertainty. Every marriage experiences moments when trust must be rebuilt instead of simply assumed. That doesn't mean love has failed. Sometimes it means love is becoming stronger because 2 people are willing to face uncomfortable truths together instead of running away from them. There is another lesson I carry with me now whenever I hear gossip about someone else's relationship. I no longer assume I know the full story. I remember how quickly one misunderstood sentence nearly destroyed my own peace. I remember how incomplete information became confident judgment. And I remind myself that kindness is often wiser than certainty. If there is one psychological truth that continues to stay with me, it is this. Our brains naturally search for danger because they are trying to protect us. But healthy relationships require something stronger than instinct. They require intentional trust. Trust is not blind. Trust asks honest questions before believing frightening answers. That simple habit could save countless relationships from unnecessary pain. Sometimes people ask me whether I regret opening that metal box. The answer surprises them. Yes. And no. Yes, because I invaded the privacy of the man I loved most. But no, because that painful mistake forced me to confront something much deeper than financial documents. It forced me to confront my own fears. It showed me that insecurity can quietly disguise itself as intelligence. Suspicion can disguise itself as caution. But neither one creates peace. Only truth does. Today our children are growing up in a home where we talk openly about feelings, finances, mistakes, and forgiveness. We want them to understand that money is an important tool, but it should never become the measure of a person's heart. We want them to know that successful marriages are not built by people who never doubt each other. They are built by people who choose honesty before assumptions and communication before silence. Every now and then, my husband smiles at me and jokingly asks, "So, do you still think I married you for money?" I always laugh before answering, "No. I think we both married someone far richer than we realized." Not richer because of a bank account. Richer because we found trust after fear, understanding after misunderstanding, and a deeper love after nearly losing sight of it. And maybe that is the greatest investment either of us will ever make. If this story reminded you of someone you love, perhaps tonight is the perfect time to ask one honest question instead of believing one silent fear. You may discover, just as I did, that the truth has been quietly waiting beside you all along. That's all for today. I'll be making many more stories like this in the future. Please subscribe so you won't miss the next one.